Our combination of beauty, intrigue, and a blaze of gemstone-fueled bullets is finally here, and Carlotta checks off a lot of the boxes when it comes to what we've been missing on the roster. As the first 5-star pistol DPS, she focuses on dealing massive amounts of glacial damage through resonance skill-based attacks, with a kit that seems overly complicated at first glance, but quickly becomes a lot more manageable as you spend more and more time playing with her abilities. Based off some of her initial calculations in her best-in-slot team comps, it's fair to say that she's one of the top damage dealers in the game, albeit in a single target setting. With that, welcome to our full-scope, comprehensive guide on Carlotta, the first character released across the star-studded, drip-marketed cast of version 2.0, and I'm here to break down everything when it comes to how she works, what her best equipment will be, and the steps you need to take across her team building and rotations to make the most out of her insane damage potential. As always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Carlotta, with her baseline kit, centers around the management of two unique resources built into her forte circuit: substance and multiple crystals. Across her gameplay, Carlotta generates multiple crystals through a variety of different actions on field and consumes them to generate substance, which is used to amplify the damage of other abilities in her kit. Carlotta can hold up to 6 multiple crystals at once and 120 total substance. Her first method of creating crystals is with her normal attacks. Her regular basic attack, Silent Execution, is a 2-hit attack chain that generates 3 crystals upon casting the second attack. Her charged heavy attack will additionally generate 3 crystals, and her third method of generating them is through her unique mid-air attack that is accessible after using a plunge. Other ways of generating crystals include her intro skill, her baseline resonance skill, Art of Violence, which additionally immobilizes the target hit for 1.5 seconds, and dodges, which will all generate 3 out of the 6 possible crystals. All of these crystals last 10 seconds and persist while off-field. Whenever Carlotta has crystals, her default basic attacks will be replaced with Necessary Measures, a 3-hit attack chain that consumes 1 crystal per shot and generates 10 out of her 120 total substance with each hit, for 30 total after completing the entire chain. Another method of consuming crystals is with her second resonance skill, Chromatic Splendor, which becomes available immediately after casting Art of Violence. The ability will consume all of her multiple crystals and generate 10 substance per crystal consumed, making it one of the fastest ways to fill up her forte circuit in her kit. Be warned that you'll lose the ability to cast this follow-up if you swap off-field with Carlotta, so limit your quick swap shenanigans during this part of her rotation. Another method of consuming crystals is with dodge counters, which will consume 1 crystal and generate 10 substance. Her intro skill is the final way to generate substance, simply granting 30 upon use with no need to consume any crystals at all. Substance is an incredibly important resource for Carlotta to build up across her rotations, as she requires a full 120 to consume all of her substance and cast an enhanced heavy attack that deals a large amount of resonance skill damage and reduces the cooldown of her resonance skill by 6 seconds. This ability can be used every 22 seconds. When casting this attack during the cooldown, you'll use a weaker version of the attack that still consumes all of that substance. When she reaches max substance stacks, Carlotta will enter the final bow state and increase the damage multiplier of her liberation by 80%, and you do not want to use that ability unless you have this massive buff available in your rotations. Casting her forte enhanced heavy attack and consuming substance will still allow you to retain this buff. Carlotta's Resonance Liberation, unlike the rest of her kit, is one of the easiest parts of her gameplay. Casting this ability will immediately deal Glacio resonance skill damage in an AoE and inflict the Deconstruction debuff to all targets hit, causing all attacks against them to ignore 18% defense while also activating the Twilight Tango state. This ability can be cast in mid-air. Pressing the normal attack or liberation button while in Twilight Tango will cast Death Knell, dealing a respectable amount of resonance skill damage and generating 1 of 4 stacks. After using Death Knell 4 times, you'll gain access to Fatal Finale, a powerful finishing shot that ends Twilight Tango. When Carlotta initially casts her liberation, she immediately consumes all substance and loses the ability to gain substance during Twilight Tango. She also cannot use her basic or heavy attacks and will lose the bonus from a full substance bar, Final Bow, if she ever swaps off field during Tango. When factoring in all of Carlotta's abilities and their interactions with each other, she requires careful management of both her crystals and substance stacks to maximize her damage potential. After using her intro skill, she'll have 3 out of 6 of her crystals and 3 out of 120 of her substance, making the main goal across her rotations the creation and consumption of 6 more crystals to max out her forte circuit and then cast her enhanced heavy attack, followed by her liberation with the full 80% damage multiplier from Final Bow, before releasing all 4 of her death knells and capping off her rotation with Fatal Finale and her outro skill, which deals a massive amount of glacial damage with none of the complicated activation methods like Jian's or Zhang Liyao's. In a lot lot of ways, she's very similar to Camellia, but requires much less field time to reach her full damage potential. When it comes to her inherent skills, her first grants her complete invulnerability during her mid-air plunge and follow-up attack after casting a resonance skill, and also decreases the stamina cost of flight for her entire team in exploration. Her second inherent skill causes her intro skill, resonance skill, death knell, and enhanced heavy attack to apply deconstruction, that 18% defense reduction on hit, giving her far more uptime on her and potentially her team's damage potential. Carlotta is a character with a fair number of complications, especially when it comes to her two unique resources, but with her focus on field time and the loss of buffs if she swaps off, she isn't nearly as complicated as prior releases like Chang Li, and with her built-in invulnerability and interruption resistance on several of her abilities, including her follow-up skill, she's a great option for tackling some rather tricky bosses. When it comes to actually building Carlotta, starting off with her skills, you'll want to prioritize her Resonance Liberation, as it's the primary source of her damage across her rotations. Next up will be her Resonance skill, as you'll frequently use it to generate and consume crystals and fuel her Forte circuit before her Enhanced Heavy and Liberation. Next, you'll prioritize her Forte circuit, as you'll use this every rotation just before casting her Liberation. Last on the list will be her basic attacks, as you'll frequently use her mid-air attacks and the necessary measures to generate and consume crystals. And of course, like with every other DPS character, there's no real need to level her intro skill beyond 5 to save resources, as the damage increase here is minimal for the resources required. Moving forward with her weapons, Carlotta has some very great and very mediocre options across the pistols available. These are what the overall comparisons are looking like using Static Mist, the standard 5-star pistol, as a baseline. Credits to Pridewin. Let's explain these results, starting with the Last Dance. This weapon is tailor-made for Carlotta, with a massive crit damage base stat, 12% attack buff, and a refreshing 48% resonance skill damage buff that triggers for 5 seconds upon casting an intro skill or Resonance Liberation. It'll maintain perfect uptime across all of her rotations, and will constantly refresh while she's casting her Resonance Liberation 4 times. Next up is her second best option, Static Mist. With built-in ER and a critical rate main stat, this weapon can make managing your Echo substats much easier to hit important ER thresholds and maintain a healthy crit rate to actually deal critical damage. However, its weapon effect does almost nothing for her hypercarry rotations, making it a raw stat stick in most compositions that aren't dual DPS. When it comes to 4-star options, her best option will be Thunderbolt, a raw attack weapon that grants a stacking resonance skill buff with each basic or heavy attack. It's a good option that unfortunately lacks the critical stats of the 5-stars. If you have this R5, which you very well might, it might potentially outperform Static Mist damage-wise. Undying Flame is another solid choice that synergizes well with Carlotta's kit, granting a 40% resonance skill damage boost at R5 simply upon using an intro skill. Some other 4-star options will be the new Renacita craftable, Romance and Farewell, which will easily stack up with Carlotta's Deconstruction debuff and Relativistic Jet, the Black Shore's 4-star. Both of these weapons have easily activatable weapon effects and high base attacks, making them very usable if you have no other options. The rest of the 4-stars, frankly, aren't really worth using, and you should save your resources for any of the other options listed prior instead of spending them on a stopgap weapon that you're going to replace really fast. Now, it's time to move on to her Echoes, and Carlotta has 3 options to choose from. Here's what the overall comparisons are looking like, credits to Pridewin. Frosty Resolve, the new set released in version 2.0, will be the best overall in slot, granting 12% resonance skill damage boost on the 2-piece and a total of 22.5% glacial damage upon using a resonance skill, and a stacking 18% resonance skill damage boost upon using a Liberation. She's pretty much the only character in the game that can fully utilize this set. With the Sentry Construct, the 4-cost built-in effect, she'll have a permanent 12% glacial and resonance skill damage buff simply from equipping the Echo in the active slot, making it the most reliable and powerful choice for every composition. However, building a new set of Echoes can take quite a bit of time, so it's worth looking into her other options. Freezing Frost is a decent secondary choice, but requires the use of basic and heavy attacks to fully stack up its effect, and comes equipped with an awful Echo skill that takes a massive amount of time to activate. If you've already built Yangyang, feel free to drop his set onto Carlotta while you're grinding Frosty Resolve. Your last option will be Lingering Tunes, a raw attack buffing set that requires Carlotta to stay on field for an extended duration to fully maximize its effects. This synergizes pretty well with Carlotta's playstyle, which requires on-field time before she activates her Liberation for her most damaging part of her rotation. The Mech Abomination is a simple skill to use, but unfortunately deals electro damage, synergizing very little with her glacial damage type. For all of the sets, and the best main stats in each slot, you'll want a crit rate or crit damage 4-cost, with crit rate for her signature and other 4-costs, and crit damage for Static Mist, 2 glacial damage 3-costs, and 2 attack 1-costs. When it comes to her Echo substats, you'll want to prioritize as much critical rate, damage, ER, resonant skill damage, and attack as possible, aiming for around 1600 to 1800 attack, at least 70 to 75% critical rate, and over 270% critical damage, and 125% ER for smooth uptime on her liberation, as it's needed on virtually every single one of her rotations. If you're slotting her on her signature weapon, resonant skill damage rolls are preferred over attack percentage ones, as its lower base attack relative to other options won't give those rolls as much of an effect, so don't worry about a lower attack on the character if you're making up for it with good rolls elsewhere. Basic attack damage rolls will be the only other usable damage roll across her kit, but aren't a significant part of her overall profile. The last area of investment when it comes to Carlotta involves your wallet or a lot of saved astrite, her sequence nodes, and she has some very powerful upgrades available. Big thanks to Pridewind for calculating the overall damage increase per node. Her first node provides a great level of QOL, boosting the critical rate of attacks inflicted on a target with deconstruction by 12.5%, while also causing her second resonance skill to restore 30 additional substance, significantly speeding up her rotations across her kit and giving her access to that enhanced heavy attack much faster. Her second node focuses far more on damage, granting her a massive 126% multiplier increase to her liberation's final shot. This node will be one of her biggest damage increases across her rotation. Node number 3 grants massive damage buffs to both her outro skill and both of her resonance skills, giving her a solid increase to her total damage. If you're looking to get the most bang for your buck, it's a good idea to stop here or go all the way to her S6. Her fourth node grants a moderate buff to resonance skill damage whenever Carlotta uses any of her heavy attacks for a long duration, and when you weave at least one of these attacks into all of her rotations, you should have constant access. The fifth node isn't nearly as exciting as others, granting a small, in relation to other upgrades, damage multiplier buff to her forte enhanced heavy attack. Her final node heavily buffs her liberation, granting a massive damage multiplier buff on her 4 death knell shots. Each of these shots will also inflict the scattering debuff that immobilizes the target, much like her resonance skill, for 1.5 seconds or until it receives damage. This is going to be her most powerful upgrade, but it'll cost a lot to get there. Now that we've covered Carlotta's build, let's get into some of her teams and initial optimal rotations. Her best in slot lineup will feature Shorekeeper as the support and Zhezhi as her sub DPS, as their combination of fantastic crit buffs from Shorekeeper and Zhezhi's amazing outro skill that buffs Glacial and resonant skill damage synergizes perfectly with her kit. Zhezhi also loosens Carlotta's ER requirements significantly, allowing her to have constant uptime on her liberation due to her ability to grant Carlotta 15 resonance energy upon swapping to her via her outro and intro skills. When playing this team, you'll simply build up Concerto on Shorekeeper with her skill, basic attacks, and forte before activating her echo skill, using her liberation, and then swapping to Zhezhi to fill up her forte circuit. Then you'll activate her liberation and then cycle through her resonant skill cast to top off her Concerto before activating the Impermanence Heron's echo skill and introing onto Carlotta to perform her full rotation. You can optimize this rotation by building up at least 1 bar of Zhezhi's forte circuit during your support's rotation to immediately grant her all of her stacks after your support outros to her. You'll want to run Rejuvenating Glow on Shorekeeper and the Moonlit Cloud set or the new Empiring Anthem set on Zhezhi, as it synergizes well with her coordinated attacks. Keep in mind though that you'll need a lot of investment on Zhezhi for the Empiring Anthem set to work well, and so you might have better results sticking to Moonlit Clouds unless your Echo substats get there. This team performs amazingly and will absolutely demolish any content that isn't AoE focused, but it is quite expensive, and so that's why we'll be covering some of Carlotta's 4-star options in the sub DPS role as well. The most flexible option available will be Yangyang, who further loosens Carlotta's ER requirements by providing 20 resonance energy via her outro skill, while also lending some potentially very useful grouping with her resonance skill and liberation. If Yangyang is at S6, you'll gain even more power in this comp due to her built-in 20% attack boost to the team when using her forte attack. When running this team, you'll fill up Concerto energy on your support while making sure you swap to Yangyang during this build-up to cast her resonance skill and a heavy attack to give her 2 out of her 3 forte charges. Then you'll swap back to your support, top off their Concerto, and then outro to Yangyang so that she can immediately cast her forte attack mid-air, land, and then top off her Concerto with her liberation and a few basic attacks before using the Impermanence Heron and then swapping to Carlotta. You can optimize this rotation further by using the Heron right after Yangyang's resonance skill and a heavy attack during your support setup, as you'll still apply its full buffs to Carlotta if you you use Yangyang's outro skill within 15 seconds of activating it, and there's no reason why you shouldn't here. Yangyang has no real options other than Moonlit Clouds, so stick with it for now. The last option is only recommended if you have at least 125% ER, and that's Taoqi. Taoqi will be Carlotta's best free-to-play buffer, given that she grants a 38% resonance skill damage amplification on outro that lasts 14 seconds. Some might be wondering why I'm not suggesting Lumi, and that's because the shorter duration of 10 seconds on Lumi's outro skill will actually expire before Carlotta releases all 4 of her death knell shots during her liberation and her fatal finale, dramatically reducing the team's overall damage. When running this team, you'll again fill up Concerto energy on your support before outroing to Taoqi, using all 3 of her Forte enhanced attacks to grant a shield before casting her resonance skill, liberation, and then topping off her Concerto with basic attacks before activating the Impermanence Heron and swapping off. You can optimize this rotation by casting Taoqi's skill and the Heron during your support setup, but it'll still take a minute for Taoqi to fully build up her Concerto. You can smooth this out even further by using Discord, a Concerto energy generating weapon, on Taoqi instead of something that's more damage oriented, and as she scales with defense instead of attack, the weapon's lower base attack won't be too much of an issue. You'll want to slot Taoqi on Moonlit Clouds as she doesn't have any other options to buff Carlotta. In the sustain role, options like Verena will offer faster rotations but less overall damage per rotation, while an S6 Baija offers slower rotations than Verena but greater overall buffs. However, both of these two don't match up to Shorekeeper's insane critical boosts. For a more advanced rotation, you can start off with both casts of Carlotta's resonance skill before doing your rotation on your support. If you're using characters like Zhezhi on your team and Shorekeeper, then your rotation speed is going to be a little bit slower, and so your resonance skill should be off cooldown by the time you actually rotate onto Carlotta with all of the outro buffs. So keep this in mind if you're using characters like Verena or Yangyang, as they might rotate a little bit too quickly for Carlotta's resonance skill to be ready by the time that she intros in. Now that we've covered her team rotations, it's time to talk about Carlotta's, and thankfully, or unfortunately for some players, she's quite easy to use. After swapping onto Carlotta via intro skill, you'll immediately activate her resonance skill and then her follow-up resonance skill to generate 3 crystals and consume 6, granting her 90 out of her 120 total substance. You'll then attack in the air following the resonance skill to plunge and then perform her follow-up air attack, generating 3 more crystals that you'll consume using her 3-hit basic attack chain. Afterwards, you'll use her Forte enhanced heavy attack and then immediately cast her Resonance Liberation, firing off all 4 death knell shots and then Fatal Finale, before using her Resonance skill and follow-up skill to generate and consume 3 more crystals. If you have the Sentry Construct Echo skill, you'll want to activate it here, following up with an outro skill and then swap to another member of your team, ending the rotation. Every rotation after your first will be even faster, as the 30 substance generated from casting your Resonance skills after your liberation will have Carlotta entering the field with 60 out of her 120 total substance instead of just 30, making it so you'll only need to cast her resonance skills to reach 120 full substance. If you have Carlotta's S1, you'll have this benefit on your first rotation as well, as her follow-up resonance skill will generate 30 additional substance. Do keep in mind that this is the most simple and easy to use rotation I've found in my testing, so there's always the possibility the community will find something a lot more advanced and efficient in the future, so be on the lookout for some follow-up content for this character. At the end of the day, Carlotta is cracked and might hold the title of the best DPS in the game, but she has some very clear weaknesses in AoE content that are alleviated by slotting some groupers like Yangyang into her lineup. She offers incredibly smooth gameplay and the ability to parry enemies on pretty much every attack in her kit while also being a pistol user, and is the first character to fully leverage the very powerful buffs that Zhezhi provides through her outro skill. Unfortunately, it'll take a while to slot her in on her best in slot Sonata set, as it's completely new in 2.0 along with her release, but you'll do just fine in endgame content equipping her on Freezing Frost or Lingering Tunes. So if you had a Ling Yang built or Lingering Tunes on Zhangli Yao, there's a chance you can get her up and running to demolish content a lot faster than you think. She's a lot simpler than the essays in her kit might have you thinking, and in my opinion, she's worth the Astrite, especially for a newer player. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.